So I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that's very common, I would say, with almost all of our brokerages these days, and that is transaction fees that these brokerages have. And it's not typically a deduction that comes from the agent. This is actually a fee that the brokerage would charge their clients. So they would charge their seller or they would charge their buyer. And it's the agent's job to collect this extra money, say $400. It's the agent's job to collect this extra $400 from the buyers or sellers at closing. And only in the case where the agent fails to do that or just doesn't collect it, then typically the agent will have to pay that amount. And what happens very, very often when we're setting up new clients, we'll start setting up commission plans, and it always comes up, well, how do I add in this transaction fee? And then they'll explain kind of in length that this is something that they charge their buyers and sellers. And from there, we usually have to kind of change pace, because the important thing about commission plans are always a reduction. We have a starting point in a transaction, and anything you do here is reducing commission. There's never any option to have a pre-split addition or post-split addition. These are always deductions. So then we will tell them that this is something that you guys will do transaction by transaction. And when they do that, we'll actually take them to their transaction. And here we have just a basic listing. And at this point, the brokerage needs to collect this $400 from the seller. And there is a couple different ways of doing this depending on the brokerage need, but I think it's important to outline the different options. The very first thing we can do to add in additional income is we can add additional money to the gross income, or we can add in additional money here as other income, which actually only adds the dollar amount to the company's net. So it does not affect the gross income, it only affects the net. To go through the first scenario, if they wanted to add the money to the gross income, they can click on the gross income line. They can choose to add this new income. If they choose shared, this will increase the amount of dollars that are going into the agent's actual split. So it's very rare that they would make this a shared income. I'd say 98% of the time, they would always say, I wanted to add an unshared income, which means the brokerage gets to hold on to it at first. It'd say an unshared income. We'll call this a transaction fee for $400. And then down here, you can see this is actually, who we receiving this from. And at this point, you could put in the client's name. Which would be your seller. And when we do this, we've now added $400 to the gross income line. But what you'll see is when we look at our agent, the agent's gross wasn't affected. That $400 was just added to the gross income, and the company is holding on to that money now. And now at this point, a couple different things can happen. Sometimes if the transaction fee was only $200, the brokerage will collect the $400, and they'll actually give the excess amount of extra money back to the agent. So since they're holding on to the $400, we could do a post-commission deduction, which is deducting money from the company. Here we would say we want to take $200 of the dollars the company is holding on to and pay this to Casey Gregory. And at this point, they would be done. We collected $400. The $200 that was an overage, we put as a deduction back to Casey. And now you can see Casey's commission has gone up $200. Now, the other way to do this, I think it's more common, is delete this, what we did. So what is slightly more common is instead of adding this additional commission to the gross income. They'll say, well, we don't want it to reflect in the gross income because when we look at our reports, we want to see what the actual gross commission was. So they don't want to affect this number. And to do that, we can instead go to this other income and we can add other income here. Very similar process. This is going to allow us to add money to the deal and the office is going to be holding on to it. Transaction fee of $400 that we got from Jane Henderson. And now when we do that, you'll see the gross income was not affected. But here in the office net number, we have absolutely added the $400 to their income. And then the same thing could happen. If they held on to it, you know, we would be done. But if they needed to pay an overage to the agent, they could do the same process. You can make a deduction from the office's commission and say we are going to pay $200 to Casey. So these are the different scenarios that can happen when brokerages are collecting this money from their clients, buyers and sellers. But the other step that is important is what happens when the agent fails to collect it or agrees not to collect it. In that instance, the brokerage will always, almost always, make the agent pay that fee. So what that means is we can now go to the agent. Since they failed to collect that transaction fee, we can create this deduction of $400 from the agent that has to go back to the company. And so here we go. Now the agent is getting their commission reduced by $400 so the company can have their transaction fee. Now, since this does happen transaction by transaction, there is no way to automatically add this additional money to a transaction. We do have some things we can do within the commission plan to just assist with it a little bit. What we'll do is we're going to go to this commission plan that Casey's on. He's on this 70/30 plan. Now, to help automate some of this, what we can do is on the paid by agent line, we can add in a deduction that's already here and it just will show up on every transaction. We can call this uncollected transaction fee. We can actually leave this at $0 getting paid to the company. All this does is it shows up on every transaction and it has no effect because it's $0. But if for any reason the agent failed to collect that fee, it's as simple as clicking on the pre-created deduction and putting in the amount. The only other part of this that we can partially automate or prepare for is in the case where the transaction fee is collected, but any amount over the fee, they get to pay back to the agent. So here we can do the same kind of line item where we can create a deduction coming from the office's income. And we would call this transaction fee overage. It's usually a dollar amount. And then this gets paid to, you use like a filler contact to add a recipient would be a good way of doing it. So this is kind of a shortcut the brokerages can build into their commission plans to assist with this, understanding that additional income will always be added transaction per transaction. And what you'll see here is the difference. Let's go ahead and just start over. We have a 3% deal. We're going to add Casey Gregory on our 70/30 plan. And now we have some of these things kind of in place if we need them. First thing you look at, if I go to Casey's commission plan, his commissions have all been split and paid out, but this line item again exists in case Casey failed to collect that fee from the seller. If that was the case, they could simply click on this, charge the money, and be done. The other scenario that could happen is Casey was able to collect that money. So Casey collected the $400, but the brokerage only charges $200. So Casey gets some money back. In this case, again, the additional income will have to be added transaction by transaction, whether we do it as other income or gross income. But we can go ahead and add this as a transaction fee for $400 received from Jane. Now the company is holding on to this $400. If they ever needed to pay any of this back to their agent, this deduction is pre-created and it exists. They can access it. They can put in the amount they want to pay back to the agent and simply remove this filler contact and put your agent into the box.